Manx Radio's budget coverage, brought to you by Crow, Isle of Man.
Well, fast am I. Good evening and welcome to our Budget 2026 special, which is brought to you by Crow, Isle of Man. We are live from Looky's at the Best Western Palace Hotel in front of a live audience. We didn't even rehearse that. We are joined by the Treasury Minister, Chris Thomas, and the people who are with us today to listen here, to ask some questions, cover a variety of sectors on the island, from health and hospitality to local authorities and the third sector. And if you weren't able to be here with us, but you do have a question, please do get in touch. You can email studio@manxradio.com or you can text 166 177. We have Phil Gaughan and Christian Jones on the microphones here as well to take questions from the audience and offer their insights as well. But first, Minister Thomas, thank you so much for being with us. It's been quite a week, I imagine. I just want to start by saying, obviously, the Isle of Man Budget 2026, you've been very clear. It's framed around three themes: stability, security, confidence. You were very clear that that word confidence was your addition. You've refuted claims from more than one quarter that this is essentially an election budget, especially when it comes to personal allowance increases. I think you can see why it looks like that, though, can't you? There were never going to be any really big, hard-hitting decisions in here, were there?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Beth. It's great to be here. What more could I want to be doing on a Friday evening after the end of a hard week than sitting with Beth and other friends, I hope, to discuss such an important topic. Look, this budget should have been made last year, if not the year before that. So in that sense, it's not a pre-election budget. It's the right budget to have made for the Isle of Man, to make sure that we have stable and secure public services provided by stable and secure public revenues. And that's what the job of a public representative is, to make sure we're in that sort of place. We haven't been as positive about ourselves as we needed to be, and there are a few features of this budget to help us have more confidence. And that's what I'd like to say as my opening remarks.
So the Chris Thomas then, who was a backbencher in 2024 and 2025, when both times you voted against the budget. In fact, I seem to remember you calling it last year as a budget being an opportunity for electioneering. Tell us honestly, would you, if you'd been a backbencher, have voted for this budget if this was the one that was before you?
Categorically. So basically, the crucial change between the government that I didn't join and chose not to join in 2021 after the election is the refresh of the economic strategy and the refresh of the Island Plan, which happened in 2025. Categorically, the issues now about connectivity, about really financing infrastructure and housing are there, and they all emerge from the refresh of the Island Plan. So I was right not to join in 2021, and it's our absolute privilege to be invited back, to come back to join Mr Cannon, who I proposed as Chief Minister in 2016. Now he's seen the light and he's actually refreshed his own island plan. I mean, I felt sorry for him for the last couple of years because he was a prisoner in his own Council of Ministers, and I feel delighted to have been able to free him from aspects of his Council of Ministers policies through working with, as a backbencher, to make sure we had those policy changes. And I'll give you an example. This is perhaps the biggest single thing that reflected people's minds. I was quite mischievous as the gambling legislation started going through the House of Keys, and people were trying to frighten us about Moneyval with an amount of GDP that had vanished, that could vanish in the future if we carried on with the bill unreformed, unamended. But in actual fact, that amount of GDP that we were trying to be frightened about was actually more than we'd lost in GDP in the bad years when we hadn't had a partnership between growth, between the industry and the regulators and the government. And I think my contributions in that debate got me the job as Treasury Minister, because I was talking truth to power, and the bill was amended kindly by Miss Lord Brennan, who said at the time she was moving amendments I would have been moving, and we are where we are, and the government's on the right track, and it's an absolute privilege to be making the budget now, which, what a shame it wasn't made last year or the year before when I voted against the budget. I have voted for 3 budgets in the 5-year Cannon administration and haven't voted for 2, but you were right to pick it up, and thank you for being such a perceptive journalist to ask that right question, which nobody else has asked this week.
We should leave it there then. Now, you call this a budget for stability, security and confidence, as I say. There is, though, still that forecast deficit for years to come. So I suppose some people might argue, where exactly is the stability?
Well, there's lots of aspects of stability, and I'll come to those. But you've given me an opportunity there to apologise to my colleagues for exaggerating the structural deficit and the reserves, because they really heard it, and they heard it too loud, and they started amplifying it in their budget speeches. But look, when I first went in 29 days ago, I know that from an earlier conference I did today, the first slides I put up for my colleagues were the fact that the reserve fund part of the national wealth was only a quarter of the total national wealth. It was £500 million of a £2 billion set of funds and reserves that we have. And they really heard that, and ever since then they've been talking about a drain on reserves. But I've got the real figures here now, and if you actually include investment returns, which I didn't do up to this point, if you include investment returns, we haven't really taken down reserves that much in this administration, because the opportunity of having £2 billion of reserves is that you get a lot of interest and stock market returns on £2 billion of investment reserves. And except for the COVID years of 2020, 21, we nearly made up for what we were not balancing, and we were spending more than we were bringing in each year with the returns that we were getting on investment reserves. Literally, that is drawing down the reserves, but spending the interest you're getting depreciates the real value of the reserves, not the absolute reserves. And so we've got to move back now to a proper understanding of it. The reserves have been growing in value slowly over the last 2 years. They haven't been maintaining their real value because we've been spending the investment returns. And now we've got to move to a position whereby we actually use those investment returns to rebuild the real value of our reserves, so that we have them there for a rainy day from the reserve fund. But most importantly, we preserve the National Insurance Fund as a bedrock for our state pensions and our social security, and to pay the margins of our healthcare costs. So there you go, a confession. I exaggerated for the effect, to make sure that people understood that we could have this budget of confidence where we gave some money back, their money back, by not taking it off them. It didn't cost anything to have the personal tax allowance. We basically just forewent some returns that we could have taken from you, because we've increased the personal tax allowance.
Isn't it, though, potentially still a budget that is reliant on expectations and the market staying strong?
Yes, you're right. So investment returns come from the markets. That's one point. But putting money back into people's pockets is done for a reason, and the Chief Minister made a very powerful speech. Minister Ashford made a very powerful speech about this. We need confidence after the budget. We need people to invest. We need people to be able to work longer hours. That's why after Christmas the process began to slow down the increase in the minimum wage, to make things add up in some of the lower paying sectors. This budget is about putting some of your money back in your pockets, because ultimately we're public representatives who have the privilege to spend your money on providing public services to you. And beyond the budget, there's several themes that I laid down, and one of those themes is actually to, for instance, begin thinking about what the world will look like after Moneyval, rather than solely focusing on Moneyval, and actually making sure we have a clear vision that provides the confidence for younger and middle-aged people to carry on borrowing money to buy houses in the Isle of Man and make their homes here, and that we have the confidence for people to still to return home here, in whatever sector they work, so that we're in a better place in a few years than otherwise. And that have been lost slightly.
Phil?
The leader of the Liberal Vannon Party made quite a different speech in relation to reserves, and we have here a member of the Liberal Vannon Party who may have a different take than the Treasury Minister.
Thanks, Phil. Paul Weatherall, Chair of Liberal Vannon. Blatant budget bribery is how I would describe the budget, and it's just passing the problems on to the next administration to have to cope with. Taking money out of the reserves for basic current revenue is never a good idea unless it's an emergency. And I think the only emergency that the Council of Ministers was facing is whether they'll get re-elected in September. So we're looking forward to the election and the public seeing through this budget and looking for competence and transparency and openness from the next administration.
Minister, blatant budget bribery?
Well, I feel really guilty for two ways. Firstly, I hate to admit this, but I know it's Mr. Hooper's birthday today, and I don't think I should be too nasty about somebody on their birthday. And secondly, if you go low, I'm going to go high. I'm not going to get into personal disputes, but I think I've just said that Mr. Hooper was wrong, and Mr. Hooper also said that the Isle of Man was practically bankrupt, and that's wrong. Moody's are giving us a very good rating still, and we've got a very low amount of debt to equity. And I think I've just explained very clearly what we've been spending is the interest and the stock market returns on our reserves. We haven't actually been lowering the reserves. It is true that the National Insurance Fund has become a greater proportion of our reserves, and it is true that the amount of reserves in our reserve fund have meant that I can't go on and say we're going to build Castle Rushen High School next month, whatever it costs, because that would be a ridiculous thing to do given the way that some projects have gone. But sadly, Mr. Hooper exaggerated the situation and is going to exaggerate the situation, obviously. And I'm very sorry, but although his maths adds up, he can spin it in that way. But I've spun it in a different way, and sadly, my way's correct. It's just I was perhaps exaggerating the threat to reserves to make people understand that we had 50 million a year to spend on capital projects. It wasn't like the 1990s and the first part of the 21st century, where a Treasury Minister could get up every budget and announce a new school or a new airport extension or a new link span or a new vessel or something else. We're now in straitened times where we've got to use the new project development process so that we get rid of any optimism bias that's there. We actually start projects once we know how we're going to finish them and what the risks are in carrying them ahead, rather than politicians before an election just going out there. Just to answer your question, Paul, you made a statement that people haven't received this budget very well. That's not been my perception. We'll see. There's an election coming up. It's a wonderful occasion, an election, because you get to talk to people about what their views are. But I perceive that there is good news, and more people have said to me, there's two things in all this. There's the notion of a pre-election giveaway budget, and I've said categorically this budget should have been last year or the year before that, and then I could have voted for it. But more people have said to me, there's another concept, which is the pre-election vote against the government and vote against the budget, and that's what's been going on, I suggest, with some of my colleagues. It's much easier, they feel, to get elected if they're seen to be somebody who's against the government. I've joined the government, and I'm fully supportive of it, and I'm so pleased to be working with the Chief Minister and the Ministers and most of the House of Keys who voted for the budget to actually celebrate what we are now doing and can do in the future.
So when you voted against them, were you just doing it to curry favour with the people?
No, not at all. I made some really good points, and they've listened to most of them, and they've made me Treasury Minister after my excellent speeches.
Phil.
Good evening. Kiri Jenkins, Chair of Arbury and Rushen Commissioners. One of the questions that I've been asked numerous times this week, Minister, is that the budget states that the costs of energy transition are significant but are not included in this financial plan. So my first question is, can you confirm if and when Treasury will bring forward a fully costed strategy for Tynwald approval? And the second part to that question is, given the MUA existing debt position, the upcoming bond maturities, can you confirm whether this budget assumes additional borrowing for onshore wind generation, and how Treasury has assessed the sustainability of increasing the debt exposure?
Minister.
Oh, no, that's very, very good questions. And there are 4 or 5 people here today who heard me earlier on this morning in the same place. And I did tease at the end of that presentation this morning that the really good question to have asked me during this week, especially in Tynwald Chamber, that nobody asked me, is why does it say in the Pink Book yet that we haven't costed the energy transition? And I did tease people towards the end of the week that that was something that I would have said about in my backbench speak if I'd been presented with this Pink Book. And it's a really good question. So we're not yet in a situation to cost Caervai wind farm down at Erie Staine. We're not yet in a position to cost some of the things, and to me that is disappointing, and that is a point I've been making for 2 years. So we need to cost those things. We need to cost the solar, we need to cost the energy and in homes element of our energy strategy. We need to cost the transport element. So we haven't done that as yet. And if I was a backbencher, that's what I would have savaged me with if I was a backbencher this year. And we need to get that. And I'm Treasury Minister, and I'll do everything I can to make sure that we're more certain on the Care-Vi costs before we put planning permission in, and that we have a better handle on all of the implications of our energy strategy. What you have in this year's budget is you have £35 million from the Consolidated Loans Fund for the Manx Utilities Authority. They're the biggest beneficiary of the budget capital programme, it's the biggest single beneficiary, and £10 million of that is to keep the gas turbines going until we're absolutely certain that we've got an alternative to the gas turbines. Ultimately, we've paid for the gas pipeline. That's how we've ended up with 120 million or so in our Manx Utilities Authority bond repayment fund, because we now pay into that fund all of the money that used to go to the Irish Gas Board for capital financing of the gas pipeline. And so we have choices when it comes to repaying the £75 million water bond in 2030. We could not repay that bond. We could try to refinance it, given the excellent credit rating that we have, given that Mr. Hooper is wrong. Oops, it's his birthday. I shouldn't keep going on about him being wrong. But we can do that in 2030. 2034, we can also think about refinancing the Electricity Authority bonds. These are all alternative capital options. I put them clearly on the table during this budget, and the energy strategy is one of the infrastructure projects that we've got to fund, alongside housing, alongside connectivity issues, alongside so much more.
Is it just a danger, though, that we keep pushing these decisions further and further down the road, that ultimately, obviously, it's not going to be this administration that has to deal with them, but at some point, somebody is going to have to?
Exactly. So you wouldn't believe how aggressive Treasury is being to the Manx Utilities Authority to say, specify the costs. We need to know what the costs are, because we need to be in a better position. I've said that in 2023 when the energy strategy first came through, a bit late. I said that in 24 last year. We were promised that it would be ready this year. It's not. It's absolutely one of the issues that's very important for me, and you wouldn't believe the pressure that I'm putting on that to get these things costed.
And when do you think that'll happen?
As soon as they possibly hear me that it's important, because we need to have those ideas. One of the great things about the Isle of Man is we have stable and secure energy supplies. We have stable and secure energy supplies from our gas turbines. We're maintaining them till we don't need them anymore. We make money from time to time by selling into the UK. In terms of offshore wind, potentially it's a massive revenue scheme if we can get the ability to supply to the UK, and if we can get into the contracts for difference regime. But they're still assumptions and ifs, and we need to secure those.
We have another question.
Yeah, just on what you've been saying there, Chris, you're talking about Manx Utilities coming up with firm costs or firmer costs before the planning permission is given. But perhaps some of the costs would be any mitigation measures that planning put on Manx Utilities. So I think we have to wait for that to some extent as well.
Fair comment, and how you treat decommissioning costs and so on, mitigation costs, is all subject to accounting standards and things, and these things are much more complicated when you get into it. But it's a very good point, Paul.
We have another question.
Hi, it's Margaret Brown. We were talking about sometimes putting things off. 20 years ago, we had the Scope and Structure of Government report chaired by Mr. Robert Quayle. Mm-hmm. It seems that, generally speaking, governments have just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're talking about cost savings, and we're talking about reserves. But surely one of the things I would like to hear that is being looked at, Treasury Minister, is the scope and structure of government and slimming it down. There's lots of money going to different departments, but we really, I feel, need to look at the structure and the slimming down of government.
Fair comment. And 2 out of the 3 internal working groups on the 2006 report were there today in the conference earlier on, and we talked about that very point. And obviously for a few years, 2006 through till about 2010, there was this concept of the burning platform. And I got Mr. Quayle's permission to start using that phrase again, the burning platform. We do have a burning platform now. So what can I say to reassure you, Mrs. Brown? The first thing I can say to you is that is that I think we've accepted the challenges that we've got. So what the other thing I laid down very clearly to Tynwald members and have been doing in presentations, I can't show you the picture now because we're not using slides this evening. They don't come out very well on radio. But basically, healthcare costs are now over 400 million a year, whereas at the beginning of this administration they were lower than 300 million, and by the end of our 5-year plan there'll be 475 million. But that's optimistic in the sense that if you extrapolate forward from what the growth rate has been since 2021, we get to a figure of 675 million a year by 2030-31. So it's not just as simple as general statements about scope and structure. We've actually got to decide what we're going to do in healthcare. And you don't want ideology coming into that. You don't want politicians who don't really know about the different care pathways and the like involved in that. What I need the Manx Care Board to assure Treasury and Tynwald that they're on top of that growth path. And I am actually confident that the minister who's been there a year and a half or so has actually made sure that some work that's been going on in that time is just about to be presented to Treasury and then beyond Treasury to identify and attribute the real demand and the real cost growth factors such that we can have a really good understanding of why the amount has been growing. So and which of those demands and which of those expenses we can control and which we can only control if with public consent through an election process. I think that's one thing about healthcare. But beyond that, Treasury has been working with a leading Isle of Man consultancy firm to develop our ability to prioritise budgeting. And what I think the agenda for that really is to lay it out for us a bit like perhaps we could have done back in 2006 to 2010 if we'd have carried on with that work, exactly what we get for our money in different places, so that during the election and beyond the election we can begin to make choices about how much we're prepared to pay and what standard we want things provided for in the light of actual information. So I'm told we're just about to see the first results of the prioritised based budgeting analysis, such that we can actually make choices. So if I give you some examples, back to healthcare again, we have an on-island non-emergency patient transfer. That's moving from the Department of Infrastructure through to Manx Care. But how it moves, the standards are being increased in certain areas, but do they need to be increased in every area? And the answer is, I would have thought, clearly not. If you need a medical standard patient transfer for non-essential medicine, you need it at medical standards. If you don't, you just need it at lower standards, and we've got to get that right. And I've witnessed and chaired some quite unpleasant discussions about that process, because all of us want to make the transfer from Department of Infrastructure to Manx Care as soon as possible, but there's budget because Manx Care are not prepared to do it except at certain standards. So we've been involved in disclosing those standards. Sorry to be taking so much time, Beth.
No, not at all. I just think, just going back to what Mrs. Brown was saying there, though, when it comes to things like the size and scope of government and efficiencies, there's a real danger, isn't there, that those just become buzzwords that are bandied around, but actually nothing happens.
Exactly. But, once we see prioritised budgeting and we see the staff numbers involved, I hope the public will help politicians after the election particularly make choices. So it's all very easy to say we support healthcare and education, we support frontline services, but we need definitions, because ultimately every nurse needs somebody to purchase the medicines and the devices that are being used in processes, and need somebody to make sure that all the people are in the right place. So it all becomes very, very tricky. What you don't need politicians making capital about this. We need work streams to make sure we actually have proper developments about this. And I do think something's going to happen. I've accepted the Chief Minister's invitation to join his operational Performance and Change Board, which is the first time a Treasury Minister has been in that, and the idea being that we are going to link budgets more closely to service delivery changes. We do have monthly meetings now between Treasury officers and each of the departments to challenge each other. Minister Kane's here with us today, and these are absolutely vital. These are absolutely vital meetings.
Is there a danger of too many meetings, too many reviews, too many conversations, but not enough action?
Exactly. We can't, there's no point going back to Sir Jonathan Michael and generalised reviews like scope and structure. We've now got to make changes to our healthcare service, and it's the duty of politicians to put clear choices, costed options. You know, it felt to me when I was anti-government since the last election that, there were so many people and my colleagues who basically put something down inside Tynwald to get it resolved that we would do something like a carers strategy or like a mental health strategy. And there was no funding associated with it. There wasn't even clear costing associated with it. And that's the wrong way to do politics. It's the wrong way to get Tynwald to resolve to do something without identifying how it's going to be done, what it's going to cost and who's going to benefit from it. But let's forget generalised scope. I mean, Mr. Quayle's work was great work. Sir Miles Walker was involved. Dick Horsfell was involved. There's lots of, it was excellent. Lots of the things that came out of it were followed up and couldn't be made to work. Lots of the things still need to be followed up. And what I'd say is let's be practical, let's be pragmatic. Mr. Watson, leader of the Douglas Council is here tonight as well. I'm looking forward to his question when it comes. But I enjoyed a media presence with him a few days ago. And we were very pragmatic, despite political, ideological differences, about how we deal with housing. And that's what we need. We need to work together to partner to make practical action to go in the right direction.
You're listening to Manx Radio's Budget 2026 special, brought to you by Crow Isle of Man, live from Looky's. We'll be back in just a moment.
Remember when you used to get business advice from your bank manager? Stiff upper-lipped pillars of the community whom you called Sir? Nowadays, you can get all the advice on every business issue from the friendly, down-to-earth chaps at Crow Isle of Man. And some of the chaps are even women. Imagine! Crow Isle of Man. Global presence, local knowledge.
Crow Isle of Man. 627 335.
Quayside Tyre and Service Centre, where alongside quality tyres and excellent servicing, you'll find a whole lot more besides. Choose Quayside Tyre and Service Centre for diagnostics, cam belt changes and aircon, along with laser wheel alignment and all your mechanical and electrical repairs. With courtesy cars available, excellent friendly service and competitive prices, visit Quayside Tyre and Service Centre on South Quay Industrial Estate, and you'll soon be back on the road.
Quayside.
Jeffrey, that suit looks terrible. The sleeves are far too long and it doesn't button up in the middle. You need made to measure.
Made to measure? See if I could afford that.
You didn't complain when Spectrum made all our bespoke windows.
Ah, that was different. At Spectrum, you get a bespoke service at an off-the-shelf price, whether you choose quality PVC or aluminium.
Visit Spectrum Windows, the showroom, Derby Road, Ramsey, or call 817777.
As a long-established firm, Man Benham offer a comprehensive range of legal services assisting individuals and businesses. From sole traders to the island's largest employers, Man Benham have built up a reputation for giving a fast, efficient, cost-effective service with a personal edge. From buying and selling property to drawing up leases, employment matters, contracts and more. Call Man Benham for your free consultation on 639 350.
Man Benham, here for you.
Station, Manx Radio.
Manx Radio's budget coverage, brought to you by Crow Isle of Man.
Welcome back. We are live from Looky's this evening. If you'd like to get in touch by text or email, studio@manxradio.com, or you can text 166 177. We're going to go to another question in the audience now. I think we've got Devon Watson has a question.
No, I'm not Devon, I'm Karen. You can wait. 2.5 to 3 years ago, we had an Auditor General appointed and a team, and I'm not sure whether they're based on Ireland or not. I'm led to believe they're not. Can you give a schedule of his timetable for visiting departments and doing audits and what efficiencies he's found? And if he hasn't got a timetable and he hasn't been to any departments, why not?
No, that's a very interesting question, very good question. I think that came up in the budget. I think Miss Edge asked a similar question and made that statement about the fact that £500,000 or perhaps even £600,000 is there for the budget. So it's not, the part of the role of the Tynwald Auditor General is appointing the external auditors. I guess part of the role is also looking at the way we do accounting standards, and I think there's lots of local authorities who've had their accounts delayed by different views about it. Treasury, we've had a lot of time thinking about how we're going to deal with some Public Accounts Committee, then Tynwald recommendations about accounting standards. But ultimately, the way the Chief Minister saw it, the way I saw it at the time when I worked with the Chief Minister, is the point of an Auditor General is at least to pay for themselves. At the moment, it looks like just a cost to the public purse, and so therefore I think the 3 years of the Auditor General is coming towards an end, and I think there's a pledge from the people moving for the Auditor General that within 3 years the costs of the Auditor General will be identified in savings. So I'm looking forward to how that plays out as the 3 years pass. I hope I haven't been too mischievous in saying that, but I did want to say it, and I do have permission to say that. I hope it doesn't get me in trouble with all of a sudden investigations of Treasury by the Tynwald Auditor General.
Phil.
Yes, I have here with me Debbie Halsall from Unite the Union. Now, the Treasury Minister has said that there are certain risks to his budget. One of those risks is staff costs. There's a 2% budget increase for staffing costs in this budget. Is that going to be enough, Debbie?
I don't think so. I'd just like to ask a question, Minister. You said you talked about the interest you're using from reserves. How about giving us a pot of money for the bus drivers?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Debbie, for being here and asking such an important question. Let's hope, despite offers both sides, that we can, MERS or somebody else can sort something else out. It seems not before tomorrow. I don't think I'm going to complicate issues by getting too closely involved in a piece of industrial action that seems like it's very, very, very live. But you make a valid point. I hope you will still admit that we sit down and talk with each other, and I hope that earlier. That we can talk. We can talk to each other. Obviously, got a difficult position as Treasury Minister in all of this. But as far as I can see, it's a localised dispute between the division, the department, and the union at this stage. And I haven't been involved directly. I do appreciate the information that I've received about some of the issues in terms of terms and conditions, in terms of the alleged unworkability of some of the contracts, differentials between different types of people on different types of contracts. Let's hope we can get through this in a better place. I hope I pivoted the question sufficiently, but I can see not, because there's a follow-up question coming in.
Improvements. Why don't you have us on the board? I can show you there's many costs I can actually improve on. You can make millions.
Ms Halsall was saying that if she was a member of the board, she'd be able to show you where you could make some cost savings and save some money.
Yeah, and that's and that's a point. There's I did meet an old school trade unionist as I was walking here, and I did say I mentioned that I met them as this question came up. And you are right. I mean, until Alan Bell's day, we had a National Economic Development Committee whereby we had a regular exchange between trade unions and business representative groups and other people. We've got lots of issues, and that jaw rather than war is always better. Obviously, that is, I think, government's line, that if more is going to be given in terms of settling the terms and conditions, it's got to come from the departmental funds. That's why we've set a 2% pay cap on departmental budgets. Treasury's got that pay cap as well. So, your dispute here is a long-standing one. There have been cases lodged, I believe, around this for years, and let's hope we can get to a fair and workable solution through MERS, and I hope we don't, this doesn't dominate the discussions this evening any much more, because I'm obviously bound a little bit, not being the Minister directly involved.
Would there be a pot of money from your department, though, if it was needed?
Well, in the past, the contingency fund has been used for instance, like most recently, I can remember the constabulary were given some money from the contingency fund. But let's there's some quite fundamental issues to do with terms and conditions in this dispute. So I can see that Carl's there. I've met Debbie. I've met Carl. We've talked about this over a large number of years. I'm very delighted that people have chosen and trusted me to share with me some information from both sides. And I do hope that we can work out. We can get beyond the first 10 days of this strike, if that's what it's going to be, and hopefully it's the last 10 days, and hopefully it can be settled sooner rather than later, because it is going to be disruptive next week.
Christian.
Hi, I'll try and make this as non-ideological and productive and practical as possible, Chris. Hi, Devin Watson here from Douglas City Council. And essentially, I've got two questions. The first one relates to housing, and the second one relates to disability benefits. So the first one regarding housing is I really want to thank you and your department for sort of reaching out to us and taking the time to engage really positively on housing matters. And it seems as though with the Housing Deficiency Fund increase, there might finally begin some work in this administration around really solving some elements of that housing crisis. There are about 1,000 families on the waiting list at the moment, and there are about 250 of those families in Douglas. We've had enough expressions of interest come in to sort of clear that waiting list if that funding is available, given the fact that reserves are quite healthy now. Is it possible that we can receive some of that funding, and if we were to put those expressions of interest through to Treasury, that we would get approval for those projects so that we could finally clear and solve a big part of that housing crisis? And the second one is there have been a few people who've reached out to me with one or two concerns regarding the fact that disability benefits have been frozen as last year's rate, which is a real terms cut. And one of the justifications for that given on budget day within the audit process was that this would be used to encourage more people into work. Do you have any more explanation on that, or any more figures on that might be able to provide a bit of reassurance to people who are disabled, who are unable to work, who've now seen their benefits frozen in this regard?
Okay, two very good questions. Thank you, Devon. So we have an £8.5 million housing deficiency fund to work with the housing authorities, Douglas being the largest one of those. I look forward to Douglas to being able to help Douglas deliver. It's ambitious, it's bold, but it's ultimately excellent 10-year housing strategy. The construction sector wants it, people want it. It's what more do we want to hear? I mean, essentially, we've got to find a way to finish your projects in North Douglas, to start your projects in South Douglas, and just basically to fill up brownfield sites as we possibly can usefully. And I know you've also been very progressive in terms of thinking about mid-rent and using your equity. I've got, further to our meeting, I've got some proposals being sent to you probably next week through the offices as well. That's the first point. I did indeed promise to look more into the disability issue, given the question that I said I come back to members. Conceivably, members got an email from me just while I was walking over here. Essentially, 2 years ago, Dr. Allinson made a statement along the lines of the disability provisions and a couple of other benefits were being looked at, because in combination they were perhaps out of line. That's the gist of my explanation. So I am going to undertake to go back and look again about what the impact has been of the freeze. So essentially the idea being that they got out of line with some of the other benefits. At the very least, from 2024 onwards, we would freeze them for a couple of years, and I want to actually have that explained to me, what the impact has been on real people, so that we can do measures. So I have followed that up, and I believe the email has been sent out to all Tynwald members this afternoon. If not, it will be on Monday morning.
I have another question.
Yes, Andy Saunders was one of those leading the campaign to get the highlight in this year's budget, which was the increase to personal tax allowance. Andy, I mean, is this what you were hoping for?
Yes, it is, and I agree with Chris. This is a budget that's come too late, unfortunately. It should have been here 2 or 3 years ago. Certainly the LVA have been proposing these sorts of actions for a long time, and it's cost a lot of my colleagues and their staff and all of those people involved in those businesses their jobs and their futures already. So it's great to see, Chris, and I appreciate the turnaround that has come from this administration. I think what I'd like to see is a guarantee that if we go back to the day before you were appointed, the suggestions were of putting our businesses on life support from the FE interference with the businesses, basically. I'd like to see that you could guarantee that that's not the position that we're going to move forward, is where we'll take as much money as you can out of the government, out of the businesses' pockets, out of the staff's pockets, and then put some form of high-cost, convoluted support scheme in place from the government themselves.
Well, you have my word that until August, September 2026, we won't be proposing anything, to create work for you, applying for support schemes. And I do hope it's an important issue in the election. The economy is a very important issue in the Isle of Man now, and just basically adding bureaucracy and complexity to support it and more money from the public purse isn't the right way. The best way is to free up economic agents to work better. When we get to the situation where there are rumours that MHKs are hearing that they're going to be banned from hospitality outlets because of their ignorance in terms of dealing with the market. It's getting a pretty serious situation when people, and the like. So I hope that all my colleagues heard that it's very, very important to remember that the Isle of Man way is to use, to gather people's money only to the extent that's necessary to provide necessary public services. We've always had a low tax tradition. We don't tax capital, we don't tax wealth, we don't tax inheritance. That's a very important fundamental aspect for 3 centuries in the Isle of Man, and I do hope that the election reinforces that basis.
Phil?
Hello, this is Chris Corlett from Chamber of Commerce. Just to build on that point, the economy will be the most important point for many people listening to this. And the economic climate is very challenging. We have seen contractions in key business sectors, such as financial services and e-gaming. And that, of course, is losing jobs and losing tax receipts, which is helping to fund the public services people in this room are asking about. So would the Treasury Minister agree the number one priority for government must be stimulating more economic growth, and what more can we do to do that in the coming months and years?
Yeah. Thank you again, Chris, for saying that. And obviously in a previous role, you had an important part in developing partnership programs between industry and government, and economic programs along those lines have changed over the years. And I think we should go back to celebrating freedom and enterprise and those sorts of things, as well as proactively doing it. Earlier on today, when you first made that point, you talked about Nixon. And I know you quoted how Nixon had said something similar about elections in the 1970s in America. And the other thing that Nixon is well known for is going to China. He was able to go to China and reach out to China because he was Nixon and he had that reputation. And what I'd like to say is you're sitting very near Debbie and Carl from the trade union, and it is very important that everybody hears that I'm not only for business, I'm for reaching out and working together for partnership. And I did already celebrate, the Economic Development Committee that Mr. Bell closed down because he found it quite at the end of his time it closed down because it lost its way apparently. But to me, it is very important for the Treasury Minister and for politicians more generally to listen and to learn and to try and aggregate everybody's interests. There's not just the Chamber of Commerce's interest, it's actually trade unions and workers and farmers and retailers and people who pay rates in the rural areas, and everybody is actually very, very important, and that's the politician's main role, is to aggregate collectively for all of interest. And I hope that's something we can learn from Nixon as well, which is it was only really Nixon who could afford at the time to go to China, given what had gone on in the 60s and 50s in America. And the other point to say, which is the same point I said to you earlier, so apologies for that, the economy probably is the key role, but I did actually send back an email after our discussion today to suggest a change in the press release after our earlier meeting, because it's the key issue, the economy, but there are some other very important issues like costing the energy and making energy stable and security, like dealing with the housing issue that Devon's laid out, like making sure that the island man works for people of all ages and provides opportunities for their careers and their lives. There are some other important issues. Connectivity. It's not pleasant living in the island if our airport and our air services are not working for us all. So the economy is the key issue, but there are some other key issues, and I also want you to remember with us that there are some other issues alongside the economy.
Got another question.
Hi, Steve from Age Concern. Minister, you've put £45 million into health and social care. Two questions from that really is, one, is that just to bolster their funds so they don't come back to government for more money? And secondly, is that with the additional funds which have been given to them, is it going to make it easier for people to get doctor's appointments, hospital appointments, transfers, doctors, nurses? Does it include employment for the hospitals?
It has to. The National Health Service, goes back a long way. We rely on it. It's vital. We need to fund it adequately. But and it is a 45 million extra. It's not the whole of what the healthcare system asked for this year. We have put constraints around the healthcare, and I have asked the Manx Care Board to step up to the plate, like any good board should. But you make a good point. We're only going to be satisfied with all of our money going on healthcare if we do get the things that you've laid down so clearly. So yes, I do everything I can, but it's proved beyond politicians ever since I've been in politics in 2013. It can't just be about structure. We're not going to spend lots more money reorganising the structure. We're just going to make sure that the governance is working so that we actually get the improvements that you and I are looking for. Thanks for the question.
Hello, good evening, Minister Thomas. It's Damien Chappelli, Chair of the Positive Action Group. I would like to follow up on the issue of audits. It's my understanding that the Isle of Man government audits for the years 24 to 25 have not yet been signed off by the auditors. I would like, therefore, to ask, how can we, the general public, have confidence in the figures you are using if indeed the Isle of Man government accounts have not been signed off, and what is being done to address this gap? Okay,
well, that's what you say is true, which is that the government accounts for that year have not yet been laid before Tynwald, and they have not yet been signed off by the auditor. I actually do know the technical reasons that are still in that the technical challenges we're having, and I'm not sure if I can reveal them. This is not the right place to do them, but you can imagine what they are. They're going to be to do with projects that are still ongoing and how they're treated and the like. So what you say is true, but you can rely on the management accounts and the financial accounts that we're producing, and you can rely on the Pink Book. We do have accounts for it. There are obviously technical issues that need work. We also have a window of opportunity in the public sector, because we have a year end that's around the tax year and the like. And I think there's been a feeling that, but my current expectation is that within a few months we will be in a situation to lay before Tynwald those accounts, along with Manx Utilities Authority accounts and the other accounts that are still not signed off. I do have a number of retired accountants who keep me informed exactly when they are, and officers have shared with me all of the issues, and I've been involved in discussions around it. It's a very serious issue, but I personally haven't, being Treasury Minister, I can assure you that you can rely on the figures.
Just go very quickly to a question that has been emailed in from Andrea. Can you ask the Treasury Minister, does he fully support the removal of the My Card that the previous Minister pushed through, and does he realise the impact it's having on constituents around the island?
Well, we've still got My Cards with 30 people. So we have still provided under the Payments Exception Services My Cards to 30 people. It's obviously very important to them and very important to me that they're satisfied. We've also helped nearly 100 people open bank accounts who had thought they couldn't open bank accounts, with intensive work with banks inside the Social Security Office. I do feel for people who haven't been able to move to a banked receipt of state pensions and benefits. I'm not so sympathetic to people who are just are acting with political motives to make points. So another set of figures I've given out is that money, there are some cheques that have been sent out that aren't being cashed, and I've today, as I promised my colleagues I would, I've spent this afternoon in social security, assuring myself that they're doing everything they can to make sure that they're following up, to make sure I'm not the person who receives the letter from the coroner of from safeguarding concerns about somebody, to make sure that that there's a good reason why it does. So I completely agree with the caller. It's very important to have cash facilities, banking facilities all around the island. It's very important to make sure that nobody is digitally excluded from a good life. And I do hope we can move to a better place. Ultimately, though, we are spending £500,000 a year on very few existing MyCards, and that isn't an ideal outcome for anybody. If only we got to this situation earlier last year.
Another question, Phil?
Yeah, hello, Chris. It's Andrew Jessup, Vice Chair of Braddon Commissioners. Obviously, I'm quite delighted because I'm now a pensioner, so I've been rewarded quite well in the budget. And I've also seen some of the small businesses that are struggling in the roundhouse that it hopefully put more money in the pockets of their customers, so they make them more sustainable. But I do have concerns about how this is being funded, the continuation of the use of the reserves for general revenue expenditure. And one of my major concerns, which obviously I've been expressing for a while now since the introduction of Clause 5 into the Local Government Amendment Act, is that especially as you're proposing to reduce the money that's being made available to government departments, and obviously DOI is one of those, that there's going to be pressure coming from government departments to try and find an alternative way of funding some of the things that they're not now necessarily going to fund themselves, and there'll be pressure on local authorities to take it on, which is obviously something that you've had a fairly unanimous kickback by the local authorities in regards to Clause 5 and the transfer of services and costs, especially as the costs tend to fall disproportionately on people in lower incomes through our ineffectual, outdated rate system. So are you going to support a proper grown-up conversation with local authorities, between central government and local authorities, in terms of what services should be provided centrally, what should be provided by local authorities, and how we're going to fund it in a fair and equitable manner?
Yes. Yes. So the immediate issue, I guess, is the Northern Civic Amenity site, and I do hope that negotiations and arrangements for setting up a joint board, are successful in that. I already broke it to Mr. Watson and his officers. Douglas will then be the only body that's part of a committee for the civic amenity sites. But to me, we need to move to a better situation, and as Treasury Minister, I'll apply resources and officer time to help us get to that best situation. The second thing is, I can't believe you're a pensioner, Andrew, but I'm so delighted that you're pleased with your 4.8% and the triple lock is secure. The third thing is, you might have heard, but today I was singing the praises of the Braddon Roundhouse in an earlier conference, because to me it's wonderful that the sports community is satisfied with it. You and your colleagues came to me when I was Minister of Policy and Reform 6 or 7 years ago, when we were thinking about rates reform then, to make sure that you could be confident that you could take the risk, because you do have a biased amount of rate income because of all of the commercial rates and so on. And with that, you've actually done the right thing. You've actually spent money on a great facility at the hospital. And what's more, you've linked it into a pharmacist and to a dentist and to other facilities. And isn't it wonderful that we have community hubs like that, where you can go and meet people, whoever you are, and actually do things usefully and wonderfully close to the hospital. So, big round of applause for Braddon Commissioners for that community hub. And other commissioners have done it as well, and I'm sure commissioners are part of the solution in all of this. And where we are now is we need solutions. You are right, after the election we will have to make progress in terms of a new settlement for local provision, for waste, for housing, for civic, for amenity more generally, for open parks and spaces. I disagree with you that we've been mean on departments, though, because we have given nearly £100 million extra to the departments this year. So therefore, the total public expenditure is now nearly £1.5 billion. So I do hope that we don't think of you just as a new cash source. And yeah, Clause 5 will be sorted out. I'm sure, by Mr Crookall once he's dealt with the issue with the buses and once he's dealt with the issue with the horse trams on Tuesday next week in question time.
Very optimistic there, Minister. I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about the local authorities and the relationship with central government. There's a real blurring of the boundaries that I think sometimes the public doesn't understand, and I wonder sometimes whether local authorities and government itself understands.
You are right, yeah, and it's a great privilege to be here with you on this Friday, because I think 2 weeks ago we were together on Friday for the wonderful Heroes of Man event in the evening. But another time I remember is for a general election. You stayed up really late for the local government elections one time, and I was one of your guests a while back. And I remember us both being disappointed, so disappointed that there wasn't more engagement, despite us trying to drum up engagement in local authority elections, because it can't be right that most local authority contests are uncontested. And it can't be right that the turnout's right. So to me, there's a democratic gap in all of this as well. But it's so important to have the right housing authority, the right housing activity. It's so important to have the right waste management and recycling activity. It's so important to have the right spaces. I do hope we can work together with local authorities to re-excite people about the potential of local authorities. Devon, when I turned up for that very exciting meeting with Leader Watson from Douglas City Council, he started by telling us about the fact that they had a substantial amount of experience and equity in their housing stock. And he's right, Douglas had more money than the House of Keys 120, 130 years ago, because they had rates and we didn't have income tax. And so they built the water system, they built electricity and so on. And that we've got to remember that. We've got to remember that we've got to work together, partnership with local authorities to make sure we put ourselves in a better position inside those functions.
I think until now there really has been something of an us and them mentality, and I know that local authority reform has been something that's been spoken about for 25 odd years or whatever, and it's, again, these seem to be constant conversations with not a great deal of action.
Exactly that. We need to move beyond it. I mean, hopefully Douglas will agree that it's a bit provocative when you walk into Douglas City Council to have something like government outside government or something like that in Manx, so we don't all understand it when we're going in as the motto of the Douglas City Council and all of that. But we've got to get together with working with each other. It's never been completely friendly between down the hill and up the hill between the House of Keys and Douglas City Council. I hope it can be friendlier now, because we've moved beyond the 1920s and Douglas City Council not letting the electric railways come into Douglas and making our horse trams go out, their horse trams, to not take away from business from their horse trams, and lots of the rivalries can go away, and we can actually sort it out in terms of the functions of local authorities as housing authorities and as waste authorities.
You are listening to Manx Radio's Budget 2026 special, brought to you by Crow, Isle of Man. We are live from Looky's at the Best Western Palace Hotel. Lots more questions to come from the audience, which we will get to after the news at 6. And if you would like to get in touch with a question, if you're listening, it is studio@manxradio.com. Or you can also text 166 177. But now, with the time coming up to 6 o'clock, let's join Lewis Foster for the latest news.
Fastamai. Bus services will run on a reduced but regular timetable from tomorrow as drivers stage a 10-day walkout in a row over pay and contractual issues. Most main routes will operate on a limited hourly basis. Meanwhile, the Manx Electric Railway is being prepared for school and commuter travel on Monday. These passengers in Douglas explained how they will be affected.
It is what it is, really. I mean, it's just a case of just wait and see what bus turns up.
My partner's disabled, so I've had to come in today instead of Saturday. I'm sure they could have sorted that out better than they have done.
You can find a link to the timetables at manxradio.com. A man who cannot be named for legal reasons has pleaded not guilty to a series of child sexual offence charges during an appearance at the Court of General Jail Delivery. He denies 4 counts of inciting a child to engage in sexual activity and 7 counts of sexual communication with a child, as Christian Jones reports.
The charges relate to 3 individuals who also cannot be identified for legal reasons. During the hearing, the court was told the defendant would be released on bail subject to additional conditions. Those include not deleting internet or social media history, not installing any software designed to permanently remove files, and not installing software which would enable access to the so-called dark web. Existing no-contact orders remain in place.
A trial is due to begin in November. And Shaw's Brow car park is to be made free of charge at weekends from April. Douglas Council says it will be on a trial basis, and it follows a survey carried out last year about what would encourage people to visit the city centre more often. Turning to the latest international news now, and the US president's economic agenda has been dealt a major blow. America's Supreme Court has struck down his reciprocal sweeping tariffs, arguing he's exceeded his authority. The Democrats are claiming Trump's illegal tariff tax has just collapsed. The UK government says it expects the country's privileged trading position with the US to continue. Former chief trade negotiator Sir Crawford Falconer says businesses should exercise caution.
It will constrain the administration, but I have no doubt that they will revert to other methods, and there are other avenues open to them, but none of them will have the flexibility and the kind of immediacy. I don't think you should be popping the champagne corks if you're trading with the US.
Police will spend the weekend searching Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's former home in Berkshire after his arrest yesterday. Separately, officers at the Metropolitan Force are contacting his former close protection officers in case they have information about Jeffrey Epstein and his associates. And a note from the BBC says the UK government is considering legislation to remove Andrew from the line of royal succession. And Royal Mail says it urgently needs to press ahead with plans to scrap second-class deliveries on Saturdays. It's after again missing targets. A look to the weather now, and there are some fresh westerly winds, but this evening will stay relatively dry. Light rain will develop overnight, with temperatures no lower than 8 degrees. Manx Radio News, the time is 3 minutes past 6. For all the latest, follow Manx Radio on social media or go to manxradio.com.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Manx Radio's budget coverage, brought to you by Crow, Isle of Man.
Welcome back. We are here with our live audience in Looky's, and we're going to go straight back to them now for some more questions.
Hi, I'm Ray Harmer, and first of all, I think that the change around minimum wage was and the allowances was much needed, because actually a lot of businesses were worried. But one of the questions really in a couple of parts: is the investment strategy that the reserves is on, is it higher risk, and therefore are we more vulnerable from changes in the funds? And secondly, are we investing enough, and do you have enough money to properly invest, and do you have the ideas to properly invest in the island? So, for example, the airport and things like that, do we actually have the money, or are we in a sense managing decline? And that's the worry that most people have. And a lot more local to home is, how do I understand where the investment is in such things locally in Peel, for example, the QE2 school and the STEM block?
Minister.
No, really good question. First one first. I don't believe we've increased the risk, but we have specialised the portfolios, and we have so far realised greater returns. But it's a very, very good point to make. Haven't got quite as involved in the investment strategy and the retendering 18 months ago yet, as I will do as I get more into my role. But it's a very fair point that you make. Our target is still base plus 3%, I think it was from memory. So the target hasn't changed, and they are getting a higher return. So that implies they're taking more risk. But I like to think they're just doing it better. The second point you make is an incredibly pertinent one. Obviously, you should feel this personally, because you left behind, as Minister of Infrastructure, an excellent national infrastructure strategy in 2017-18 from memory, and that talked about having an annual refresh of the national infrastructure strategy, which would have achieved exactly what you say you wanted to achieve, and you were right to want to achieve that. And we've let you down, they've let you down, because I wasn't in government. But basically, the island plan actually didn't mention the national infrastructure strategy. So when Miss Lord Brennan recently asked, what had happened to the national infrastructure strategy, the answer came back, well, it wasn't in the island plan, so we haven't refreshed it. So basically, this government started with things like the Major Projects Board, a strategic infrastructure needs assessment. It's still work in progress. We do need to know exactly what we need, where the QE2 STEM block is relative to the Castle Russian High School, is relative to the work that's needed to be done on some schools that need attention, and where that is relative to the highways and to the ports and the like. So I can do everything I can in the next few months, and I know that the Public Accounts Committee and the Environment Infrastructure Committee of Tynwald are also interested in this, to make sure we leave behind as much of an infrastructure needs analysis. And then the point you make is a really good one. I think it was very clear from my budget speak, and I hope to add to that clarity. We then need to work out how much capital we need, and then it's Treasury's job to optimise the way of funding it. So if we need X amount of millions to get the Castle Russians High School and the STEM block in QE2 and a few extra projects, we then need to cost that and work out how we're going to fund it and the time scale for which we fund it. We owe it to the people we represent, and we owe it really to the local economy and the local industry to make sure that we can construct these things, because we are short of construction and we need certainty about it. So thank you for the question.
We have another question, Phil.
It's one gone to another here.
Thank you, Mr. Gorn. Minister...
And I should say David Gorn.
Thank you, Phil Gorn. Sorry about this. Minister, first of all, can I congratulate you on the work that's been done recently in relation to the carers strategy and the funding which has been provided in the budget to endorse that. We've had carers strategies before, we've had agreements before, but they've all failed because they've never been underpinned by the necessary funding. And you know the discussions we've had over the years on this subject, so I'm absolutely delighted to see this now coming to fruition, and the fact that it's been brought to fruition by joint incomes and joint discussions with the third sector. But the main question I want to ask is, you talk about extra funding for healthcare and to Manx care. Within that, is that implicit that there is additional funding for social care as well? Because if we are moving care out of the hospital into the community, then that obviously has implications for social services as opposed to health services. And I know from the third sector that third sector organisations are creaking at the moment to try and cope with the extra demand. For example, the food bank is now running at something like 40% higher than it was this time last year. And I was talking to an organisation yesterday who deal with disabled people, and they're saying that they're really unable to cope with everything that's been referred to them. So is there extra funding within social care, to compensate for this extra work that's being put upon them?
Yeah, the amount of expenditure on social care, mental health services has increased greater even. The strategy is one about prevention, community care, social care being equally important. They're all there. I think you've got a great knowledge of all of this, and I think you're going to have to spend a lonely weekend with your documents reading them, because there is a mandate now, and there is an operating plan which is not yet published for next year but will be published soon, and I think you need to reassure yourself about that and then give me feedback, because I'm Treasury Minister. I don't follow everything, but that's the reassurance that I need as well, that you've provided. And I'd just like to add to your thanks to me by thanking Crossroads for having worked so closely with government for years on that carers strategy. And I'm delighted that Dr. Allinson and his team before me, heard you and actually brought something inside the budget that I just picked up at the end. So I was so pleased to see it there myself. Thank you for the question.
Christian?
Yes, I'm with Onken MHK Julie Edge, who actually voted with the budget this year.
Yes, I did, mainly really because of the uplift for the personal allowance for individuals. But the question I want to ask the Minister, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer this, for every person on the Isle of Man, this budget is costing them £18,280. Not many people think they're getting value for money from that. And I want to pick up on what Mrs. Brown talked about, which was the size of the public sector and the costs, which I believe is over 600 million now, including pensions. What are you going to do as Treasury Minister different to any other minister when departments are coming to you seeking extra funding? And why do you not retain the pay award of 2% in your department and distribute it as the settlements come in from unions, as you've talked about here tonight? That's used to work in government. Treasury retained that money, whereas currently departments seem to think they've got 2% extra and they spend it. I've never seen so many jobs advertised as this week.
Okay, so 2% is below the current inflation rate, and I like to think that that Treasury understands that its role is to control the finances, having raised the finances, and I like to think that we can leave decisions locally. So I know it's your perspective, Ms. Edge, Julie, that that we should control those pay budgets from Treasury. Obviously we have contingencies to which departments and other people can bid for settlements with people, as has been discussed earlier on. I do know that the whole arrangement for personnel is under review at the moment, and do everything we can to listen to your suggestions and solutions. One point I would like to make is that vacancies is something that we need to tackle. I'd like to move that to look to more looking at establishment and the roles that are needed for every service, because in the last few years vacancies has been a huge variable that's rolled over until the time we can afford to take those positions on, and that doesn't seem ideal to me. We need to get back to controlling establishment. With Christian walking around as well, I just wanted to acknowledge that the most important event this evening is not actually this budget display, it's the IM1 programme that's coming up at 6:30, where apparently you have a simplified version, much better version of me doing something very funny, and I just wanted to apologise to Christian that I haven't actually referenced it directly because I haven't listened to it as yet, but I'm quite frightened about what I'm going to hear from Christian with his AI voice. Last time Christian made an AI video audio about myself and Mr. Smith worked together and accidentally caused the Laxey landslide. So I'm petrified to find out what he's managed to weave into your budget programme tonight, which is coming up at 6:30.
Maybe we should play it out live and watch a reaction. Phil, we have another question.
Hi, I'm Katrina from Peel. I've got a question. 29 days in, so you're fresh to the role. And I see that you've had time to create some shiny graphics. You've had time to be able to put that in the newspaper. You've had time to think about the people that earn 50, 100, 150 grand a year, and you've put more money in their pockets, which is great. But building on Devon's point and also David's point, my concern, my heart is for the people that are the marginalised, the people that have carers allowance, that disability. And from what I heard from your answer before, you just said, I'm going to send an email about that. I really feel that you haven't had time to consider them. And how can you justify that they don't get anything? These are the guys using the food bank. They're the guys using the Salvation Army. We're relying on charities to support these people who are really struggling, but we're using government reserves to give it to the people that are earning a lot. It just doesn't feel right. Can you explain it to me, please?
Yeah, well, I hope that obviously I didn't express myself clearly. I wasn't being trite with my response about the email. It's just it came up in the House of Keys or Tynwald, whatever it was, Tynwald earlier this week, and I did promise that I would answer that question in more depth, and I just wanted to make sure it was on record that I had actually been thinking about it since Tynwald. And as I explained, the decision was made by Dr. Allinson a couple of years ago, and what we're doing is we were reviewing the impact, because it wasn't quite that simple as you lay out. There was actually a group of people who Dr. Allinson said anyhow, we need to review the way that the benefits work in combination with each other. So, and also, 2 points I wanted to say. Obviously, for me personally, it's incredibly important how we look after disabled people. I've never used phrases like working people in my speeches, because to me, economically active people is about much more than just working people. And not everybody can have disability in my family. It's something that's been very, very important to me. That's why I know Mr. Gorn for so many years. I'd also want to challenge one of the things you said about this budget being for people on £150,000. People on £150,000 didn't get anything from this budget. That's not true. I mean, the personal allowance is tapered away entirely once you have to that sort of income level. So there is a point in the Isle of Man tax system where you lose £2 for every £1 you get. There's a hugely marginal tax rate that we have over a certain point. So by the time you get to £150,000, you're not getting anything whatsoever from our budget. So that's just a comment as well. It does benefit people who are on 50,000, 60,000, and I will stick by the fact that they deserve the benefit, and that's why it's a universal personal tax allowance increase, but it doesn't benefit people who are on 150,000. And secondly, most importantly, helping people who are disabled to be able to work. Equality Act. I took the Equality Act through the House of Keys. It's always been very important to me. The bus strike is a problem, huge problem, but I'd like to think that we've worked quite some years to do things like make sure mobility scooters can go onto buses alongside wheelchairs and the like, and that's happened in recent weeks after many years of campaign. So, all power to the elbow. Thank you very much for your concern for this and your campaigning in this, and it's a very important issue.
You did say in your budget speech on Tuesday that there were no real losers from this budget, maybe some people who didn't gain, but no losers. But I wonder, just given what Katrina was saying there, how accurate is that appraisal?
Well, those people who are on benefits have gained in as much as they also have the benefit for the personal tax allowance if it kicks them. But there are 21,600 people who don't pay tax in the Isle of Man. 3,600 they more national insurance. And fair point. There could be 20 or 30 people on benefits of that type who are not affected. But that's what I need to do more work on. And initial answer was circulated to my Tynwald colleagues just earlier. A fair comment.
Christian.
Just going on from what the previous questioner was asking, it's a great budget for people of my generation, but with taking another £400 million out of the reserves in the next 5 years, I'm afraid I can't get away from the feeling that this is kicking the can down the road, and our children and grandchildren are going to be paying for this budget now. What I would like to ask, how different was the budget in relation to the tax allowances and the pensions that were drawn up by Dr. Allinson specifically, and how different were your proposals?
Okay, so I had 36 hours. So what happened was I was appointed about 9 o'clock on Monday. By 11 o'clock, I met the Chief Financial Officer. 12 o'clock, I met the divisional heads, told them what we were trying to do. Tynwald was the following day. Lunchtime of Tynwald, we went back, had the options presented. We chose between them, took them to the departmental board Wednesday, took them to council ministers Thursday, and the budget was changed. So there wasn't a huge change. So the benefits decisions were made by Dr. Allinson and the council ministers before I joined. The expenditure was made by Dr. Allinson and the council ministers and before I joined. So it's his budget in that sense. Dr. Allinson also planned to increase the personal tax allowance by 750. That was the budget that I took on that time. We tripled it. The cost of the total amount of the personal tax allowance is nothing. It's just it's your money that we haven't taken from you. But we were planning on receiving. The forecast was that we would receive £30 million extra in income tax this year, and we've chosen to forego £23 million of that, meaning we only benefit by £7 million extra in income tax this coming year. Dr. Allinson's budget was already going to lose us 10 or 12 million of that, and I doubled that in the way that we did it, plus a few accounting changes. So that's the answer to your question. And I want to go back and challenge you again. I've tried to say repeatedly, we're not taking money out of the reserves. We're just not adding the interest back into the reserves. We're just not using the investment returns on the reserves. The reserves are growing this year, and as long as there's not a market crash, they'll grow next year. They've been growing for the last 4 years. It's just we've been using the investment returns for other things, for capital principally, but some operating costs, and that's meant that the real value of the reserves, which is what I've kept emphasising, hasn't been growing to keep up with inflation in the last few years, and it won't until we can stop taking the investment returns from it, which we're targeting by 2028, including National Insurance Fund reserves, and by 2030, excluding National Insurance Fund reserves.
Minister Thomas, if the ministerial change hadn't happened, would you have voted for Dr. Allinson's budget?
Yes.
Okay. Phil?
Hi, Claire Watterson, the President of the Chamber of Commerce. With public spending in recent years centring heavily around health, this has obviously impacted on funding in other areas, such as education. I note that 4.4 million has been set aside in this budget for childcare, vocational training and apprenticeships. However, do you feel that it has a sufficient investment to implement the significant changes required in education to meet the changing world of work and prepare our students on the Isle of Man to be competitive on an international employment stage, particularly with the implement of AI, and to ensure that our employers have access to world-class educated people?
Easy question.
No, it's a good question. I think the question doesn't believe quite that it does do enough, and I want to agree that we do need more work on skills. One of the bodies that the Treasury Minister is a member of is the Skills Board, and I think the Skills Board is now assessing the contribution it's made over the last couple of years. The Chamber of Commerce, from which Ms Watterson is the president, has contributed to that board. I think there's a bit of frustration on lots of sides about what we've achieved in the Skills Board, and I hope that we can achieve more beyond the Skills Board.
Another question, Christian?
Hi, it's Karen again. I have two questions actually. Going back to the Auditor General, if you mentioned that he's got a 3-year role, if he doesn't deliver what he's supposed to do within those 3 years, what are the consequences? And secondly, going to staffing and the size of government, why are they advertising a role that's a limited term of less than 12 months with up to £5,000 relocation package?
Okay, well, I'm not into the detail. I didn't mean that. It's not right for a Treasury Minister to be commenting on any individual role and any individual's personal performance in that role. I think I was making the political point, which is that when the Tynwald took the decision to bring the Tynwald Auditor General Act into force, I think me and the Chief Minister majored on the fact that we needed to cover the costs if we were going to have a new role, and I was just expressing scepticism whether that had happened over the course of the 3 years. I've got to be honest, I'm out of my knowledge zone now to know exactly what the terms and conditions are. I was just expressing the political view that I do think we're coming up to the end of the 3 years, and we've now got to ask ourselves the question: have we just created more jobs and more intervention? And I have got away with saying that as Treasury Minister in one other place, so I've decided to try it again now live on radio, on Manx Radio.
Phil.
Yes, hi Chris, Minister. Tony Brown. A lot of the questions I had in my mind have been asked, so that's fine, there's a few bits. But one I would like to know is why, and will you do something about the government's policy of not investing in our heritage, and especially our built heritage? For the last 9 years, there's been nothing of any merit in the government's budget. There's not even a mention of a strategy for heritage. And our heritage, which is quite unique and important to the Manx people, in fact is a great contributor, and for the long-term future will be, to attract people to visit the Isle of Man. Manx National Heritage can't get through Treasury to get funds for capital investment. Treasury have been told, prior to your time, Minister, have been told in no uncertain terms of the condition of some of our very historic buildings, including Peel Castle. We have the same problem with the Nautical Museum and the Peggy. And there is no policy at all from government or funding to enable us to safeguard our Manx heritage. Could I ask you to look at this, and can you maybe explain, if you know, why not?
No, I'll look at it. Obviously, thank you very much for the excellent question. It's obviously always been a passion of yours, and I remember when you were Chief Minister, we changed, as far as I remember, we changed the governing legislation for the Manx Museum and National Trust, and it's quite a political. It's got political members in the board, and I think the Minister of Department for Enterprise can direct the board as well. So it's a very interesting challenge that you've set for me. And I personally, as a member of things like the Victorian Society and the Isle of Man Natural History and Antiquarian Society, I do share your passion. As you well know, the Manx National Heritage sits alongside Manx Utilities, getting finance from the Consolidated Loans Fund rather than from the straight government capital programme. And I do share I do hear the frustration from the board of the museum and the wider Manx National Heritage that they haven't had their voice heard as yet. So I've noticed that.
We are approaching the end of the programme here. I just want to take you back, Minister, because you brought a motion to Tynwald in December 2024 about budget reform, so looking at the whole budget process. And at that point, you argued the Pink Book should be published 12 weeks before the budget debate. Obviously, you didn't have 12 weeks. Do you still think that's a viable idea?
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to two debates that we've got coming up. The first one is the committee of which I'm a member is slightly late on presenting its report to Tynwald members. The report was due at the end of February, but it will be coming back, and now obviously I'll be probably, well, I will be leading government's response to the report of the committee, of which I'm a member. But Dr. Allinson is also a member of the committee, so we've got roles reserved. So I'm really looking forward to see what Dr. Allinson and Mr. Watterson agree as being, and Mr. Ashford agree as being the contents of that report, and then we'll respond to it from government. It's complicated, it's complex, and I'm really looking forward to that debate. The other debate I'm looking forward to is on the Economic Policy Review Committee report about the structural reserve and the reserves and the minimum wage, which is we're preparing for March.
Time for one more brief question.
Yeah, we've touched on sort of public sector housing, but the private sector housing issue, we're coming to the end of the House of Keys. I don't think there was a single House of Keys members that didn't say that affordable housing was a priority to them. However, during this period, we've underperformed in terms of producing new houses. We've got loads of families struggling to buy a house. We've got people moving back in homes with their parents, etc. So what are you going to do in the last few months to make sure that we've got the stepping stones for the new administration to actually address this for once and for all?
So really good question, and very important answer needs to be provided, and I'll do everything I can, but I just mentioned two things. The first one is the Housing Communities Board Chair, Minister Ashford, has talked about making a stop-go decision on a rent-to-buy scheme. Both three things. Secondly, we've already agreed we'll talk to Douglas. Obviously, Braddon has been successful in developing some infrastructure, and I think Douglas had the privilege of providing some tenants for some of your from some of your stock. So the second part of the answer is we need to work to local authorities, and the third part is I have said in public, and I did say in my budget speech, that I've launched a review of the development viability in the light of higher construction costs on brownfield sites in urban areas. That's very much a quick process to see how Manx Development Corporation and the Island Infrastructure Scheme have succeeded or haven't succeeded, and I do think that's a very important part of it, and that will involve acceptance of things like higher rents for some tenants inside properties, and probably the ability to buy their property at the end of the renting process or during the renting process. So there's some solutions. We're getting up towards the end, aren't we? I've got to leave it to you now to do the technical bits.
I'll just ask you one more question, though. Just really sort of summing up, and I think it has been already mentioned here today, but you have previously, Minister, criticised what you said felt like putting it off to the next administration. I think that's a really key point. What would you say to those who think perhaps you are doing the same thing at this point?
I'm not sure I have been accused of putting it off the next administration, but
You've accused the previous budgets.
Okay. Well, I had to go back and look at all that. But what I would say is that the basic problem after the 2021 election was that the government didn't result from a successful election. It wasn't quite clear. Everybody knew the problem that needed to be solved, but the solutions weren't actually agreed by the public, and we need to have a better election, and I'll do everything I can through my little group, Isle of Man 2030, which is different from Future Isle of Man and all the other little groups that are around there, to make sure that we have a better election where we actually have solutions that get votes behind them.
Minister, thank you very much indeed. That does bring us to the end of this budget special brought to you by Crow Isle of Man. We have been live from Looky's at the Best Western Palace Hotel. If you've missed anything, you'll be able to listen back as a podcast, and for even more enjoyment, be able to watch it on the Manx Radio YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much to Crow Isle of Man, to Looky's, to the whole Manx Radio production team who have made this programme happen. And thank you very much indeed for listening. And Minister, thank you very much for being with us. You will be on Man & Line on Monday at midday as well, but that is all for now.
Manx Radio's budget coverage, brought to you by Crow Isle of Man.